Teresa, like usual, I'll have you come up and ask about the winter. I'll go ahead and talk about the December 3rd event.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that's
I'm gonna let you do that.
I'll have that, okay.
Yes.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have people logging on online. I know we got people still coming in. The weather here is going to change, it looks like, in the next hour or two, so we might be getting some rain. I heard up by Broken Bow by our ranch, they had 7 inches this afternoon in 2 hours, so I hope we don't get that down here. But anyway, good evening. My name's Mark Broman. I'm the Executive Director of the Wachiska Audubon. Welcome to our October meeting. I wanted to welcome everyone that's here in person and those of you at home. Wachiska is an independent chapter of the National Audubon with geographical area covering 17 counties in southeast Nebraska. You can follow us on our website and also on Facebook. Teresa Pell is our president. I'm going to have Teresa come up and make a couple quick announcements, and then we'll go on. I'll continue with some additional announcements. We got a lot of things coming up, including our 50th anniversary celebration, which I'll mention. So I'll turn it over to Teresa for a minute, and she can give you a couple updates.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Welcome to everyone in the room and online somewhere. You're all out there somewhere. So just from the board's announcements, our monthly meeting is set for Tuesday, October 17th, 7 p.m. Zoom. That is a welcome. Anyone can join us. So if you're interested, let Mark or Arliss know and they can get you the Zoom info. So the other thing that is my duty tonight is, according to we're in the nominating election cycle for next year's board. So according to Article 5, Section 2 of the bylaws, we're supposed to announce at this meeting who the candidates are for the various positions. So as a reminder, when the membership approved the bylaws revisions last year, we're shifting to 2-year terms on a rotating basis. So membership doesn't have to elect every position every year. So the positions that you will all be voting on during next month's annual meeting on November 9th are secretary, treasurer, and 4 director positions. And in the November Babbling Brook, you'll see little bios of each person. And every one who is currently in that position is eligible for another election 2-year cycle. So we have, most of them, everyone except the treasurer, has expressed an interest and a desire to become a candidate for their current position. So you will see, as I said, in the Babbling Brook, you'll have little short bios for everyone. So for treasurer, April Stevenson is the current treasurer, and she will be the candidate. Secretary, yeah. Treasurer is Dylan Oftenkamp, and Dylan is the one who is rotating off after being with us for 2 years. Yeah, I think he's been 2 years. So the directors at large, the candidates for a 2-year term will be Chris Powers. Raise your hand, Chris, back there. Thank you. Doug Campbell is usually here. Doug's not here tonight. And Stu Ludich. Stu is from Geneva, and he's usually out there in cyberspace. And Ann Briggs is also the 4th candidate that's up for re-election. We potentially might have another director-at-large position. We're talking to someone who said they may be interested, and we have a spare slot, so you may see a 5th name on the ballot. So keep your eyes open. November 9th is the annual meeting, so in addition to elections, you'll be hearing from the board on our annual report. We'll be kind of doing a short report on what has Wachiska done this last year, in case you've been under a rock and haven't been paying attention. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Teresa. I brought a few of the flyers for our 50th anniversary and the Doug Talmy lunch. They'll be out there, so if you want to pick one of those up, that'll be December 3rd at Innovation Campus, so that'll be our 50th anniversary celebration luncheon. It's the old fairgrounds, so if you're wondering where the Innovation Campus is, you can go online or to our website on Facebook or the website and sign up for the lunch and the lecture. The lunch is $40 and the lecture is free. If you don't want to go to the lunch, you can just sign up for the free ticket to the Talmy talk. But you do have to have tickets to the Talmy because we have a limited number. It is a pretty good sized venue. I think it holds 400, so I don't think that we'll fill up right away. But there's been a lot of interest in the Doug Talmy. He does a lot of, he's done several books on backyard habitat, and he's very popular right now. So, and also if you're unable to use one of those two medias, Facebook or the website, come into the office, make sure I'm in there, give me a call first. Come in and we'll get you signed up. If you're doing the luncheon, you can write a check then, or if you're just signing up for the free tickets, but we'll get you registered. So that's coming up December 3rd, and it is open. We opened it up the other day, so we had some glitches here the last couple of days, but today it was running fine. So again, you can sign up for the tickets for either event or both events online. The bird seeds has arrived. Today I helped unload it, so we got that all piled up. So tomorrow from 3 to 6 and Saturday 9 to 11 at the 14th and Arapahoe site where we've been for years. Elizabeth Nelson has volunteered her facility over there. So you can show up either tomorrow 3 to 6 or Saturday 9 to 11 if you ordered seed. We did get a couple extra bags to round out the pallets because it made it cheaper for shipping. And so here's what we have for extra things. So if you didn't order or you thought, oh, shoot, I should have got a little bit more, here's what we do have available. So it's first come, first serve on these items. So let me know if you're interested in some of these. But we have 4 bags of the 20-pound classic. They're $34 each. We've got one of the 20-pound sunflower hearts, the course. That's $55. We have one of the 25-pound sunflower black oil. That's $32. We've got 5 of the suet high energy. Those are $2 each. And we have 4 of the suet berry treat, $2 each. So that's what we have available. So we did get a couple extras. Normally we don't order extras. We just order what we have orders for, but we wanted to round that out. On Saturday, October 21st at 8:30, Tim Houghton will lead a birding trip to Little Salt Marsh, which is north of Lincoln. You can look in the October Babbling Brook for more information, or you can call me in the office. But Tim would like people to kind of sign up so he kind of knows how many people. So I do have his phone number and email. You can get it from me tonight. I've got it here, or you can call the office and get it, or look in the Babbling Brook, the October Babbling Brook. So that's the next field trip coming up. We're planning to have a second Saturday seed collection this Saturday, October 14th at 10 o'clock at Deacon Prairie. I know there's a chance of some rain, but hopefully it's not too bad Saturday morning. So that's 10 o'clock at Deacon Prairie. You can let me or Ross know, or just show up. And then I'm also going to try to do some seed collecting out at Gerald Van Duska's property maybe next week. We'll see what the weather's doing, but Gerald has graciously offered to allow us to come out and do some collecting there. So we might get a hold of him, and I'll talk to him tonight. We'll see about coming out there to do some more seed collecting. So if you would like to get out and get some exercise and collect some seed, get in touch with me. We might have an opportunity coming up this Saturday for sure, and then probably either next week or the following week. Wachiska hosted a group of Oto Missourians at Deacon Prairie and in 9 Mile Prairie. We wanted to go out to Knott Prairie, but the road was too muddy. There had been some rain, so we opted out to go to 9 Mile. So we had a couple good prairie visits with those folks. We also helped celebrate the second annual Oto Missourian Dedication Day, which the city of Lincoln hosted, and we attended several events. That group's from Oklahoma, so they're a group that originally had their village for 300 years on the banks of the Platte up by Utan, and then went down by Barnston, and then eventually went to Oklahoma in the mid-1800s. So that's a group that would like to maybe find a prairie to buy in this eastern area of Nebraska and try to get some places back here where they can come. But they came out on our property in 9 Mile and collected some plants, and it was a really good opportunity. Tonight, Tim Knott is out at hosting our booth at the Prairie Discovery Day at Brainerd Elementary. So fortunately, he was able to man that for us. We've got one more opportunity for the NRD Nature Nights, and that's at Holmes Elementary on November 8th from 6 to 7 o'clock. So if you're interested in coming and helping out with that booth, it's a lot of fun with those grade school kids, the elementary kids. So that's from 6 to 7 on November 8th. Just get a hold of myself or Tim, and we can set you up. Let's take a few minutes and see if we had any unusual bird sightings or large numbers. I know there's been some birds moving through. Does anyone have something unusual or fun at their bird feeder the last few days or the last week? Ann, what do you got?
Well, today I saw a very, very large flock over Cornhusker Highway, maybe near 40th Street. It looked like thousands of seagulls possibly, just kind of swarming around in a very large area. I don't know if they moved through or...
Last week I was down by Manhattan, Kansas, because they have Tuttle Creek Reservoir, and there were hundreds of gulls of all kinds of species flying around down there. So they're sort of staging, moving south, I think.
Middle of town.
Okay. I also heard there were a lot of, at Nebraska City the other day, a lot of chimney swifts. Someone sent me a picture. It had a bunch of chimney swifts, a commercial chimney down there. So I reported that to the Bluebirds Across Nebraska group band. They're getting ready to build some chimney swift towers. We had an article about it in the Babbling Brook. So they're kind of monitoring chimney swifts along with bluebirds. Lana? The chimney swifts? I don't know. John Carlini, I know, tracks a lot of the swifts. Okay. A good place to go is Irving Junior High School, the big chimney at Irving Junior High School. There's lots of chimney swifts. Use that when they're migrating back and forth. Only a few nest there, but there are quite a few during the migration season. Anybody else have anything unusual? Well, it looks like it for that. So let's see. I want to remind everybody that tonight's presentation is on YouTube, and also you can see other past presentations. So if you want to catch up on one, we've had a lot of people tell me they went back and watched a couple that they missed. So that's on YouTube. You can just put in Wachiska Audubon and pull those up. And tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Alex Wilds. And I've known Alex for a few years. I met him several years ago when the Back to the River Board supported some of his projects. He made these giant decals of Missouri River fish and critters, and we put them on the sidewalks around Omaha. So there are these great big colored photos. And we did it right before the World Series. So we knew there'd be thousands of people, looking down at these as they were walking around. He also had a photo exhibit at Fontenelle Forest, and he traveled up the Missouri River on an epic journey. Alex has had some wonderful and colorful pictures of all kinds of wildlife found in and along the Missouri River. Tonight, Alex will highlight the Big Muddy and expose you to the Missouri River that you may or not have thought about before. So thank you for joining us tonight, Alex. And with that, he'll take questions after the presentation, but I'll turn it over to Alex now.
Thank you much. Can everybody hear me all right? All right. Well, like Mark was saying, I met him kind of early days for this project, and so it's been a fun experience seeing how it evolves over the past few years and things like that too, and how it's expanded and kind of, branched off into different forks, pun intended. But yeah, so like you were saying, my name is Alex Wilds. I'm a filmmaker, photographer, multimedia producer just in general. So I work on a lot of things like nature documentaries for places like PBS, BBC, Netflix, things like that. So I film all around the world, these really cool megafauna, little tiny microscopic organisms, you name it. But along the way, I started to realize I needed something close to home that I could dedicate a lot of time to. Something that isn't just helicoptering in, filming it, helicoptering back out, something that may have some actual educational and conservation impacts in the long run. And so I was kind of racking my brain. I've lived in Omaha now for the past 13 years or so. And my background is actually in biology. I was a zookeeper for the better part of a decade. And so I kept on racking my brain thinking like, okay, where can I connect all these dots? Where's something that I could really sink my teeth into that, isn't gonna be just a few months of work and then done with it. And then it was during that time I was working at Fontenelle Forest, and I lived right next to the riverfront, relatively close to it, I should say. And it was right when we were having a lot of flooding and things like that as well. And I was like, you know what, there's a lot to this that I really don't know about. At this point, I was still, I'd lived in Omaha for a few years, but not extremely long. And I'm like, okay, there's something that I don't know about here. And if me, who's interested in wildlife and biology and all of this, if I don't know a lot about it, then what may or may not other people know about it? And so that's kind of what got me started on this project, which has been a passion project for, I'd say, 6 or 7 years now. And it's probably going to be something that I work on, potentially for the rest of my life. And so it's titled Floodplain just because I think we all know how ubiquitous the Missouri River is with flooding nowadays, for at least people who live in Omaha and along the riverfront. And so I wanted to talk about not necessarily the hydrology and the hard science behind it perhaps, but I wanted to show people what was living in and around the river to give them a little bit of an idea of what's at stake. People think largely about the commercial impacts and residential impacts of flooding and things like that. And it's not a bright picture, and a lot of people's lives have been upturned by flooding, but it's also critically important for a lot of the species in the Missouri River as well. And so that's just a little bit of a preface. I'll go a little bit further into detail on it as I go through, but just wanted to give everyone a heads up. I'm a very visual person, so it's going to be a lot of me rambling, flipping through some pictures, talking about things along the way, and at the end, or even during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I know they want some microphones for questions just so people online can hear it as well. But so this all kind of started in a big way after talking to a few of my friends and really thinking, okay, the Missouri River as we know it in Nebraska looks a heck of a lot different than it looks way out near the source waters. And I wanted to know personally how things change, how humans have impacted the river. And I just wanted to see all this for myself because there's a lot of information out there, but I wanted to document it and use this information to show people just how large the Missouri River is and how much it changes over the course of as you travel along it, which birthed the idea of doing the Big Muddy Expedition, as we've affectionately called it. And so this is what Mark was talking about earlier. Back to the River, generously supported, as well as National Park Service, and Audubon Society of Omaha actually pitched in a little bit as well for it. And so the Missouri River is the longest river in North America, just a little over 2,300 miles. And so people don't realize, I mean, everyone thinks the Mississippi is big, and volume-wise, yes, it is larger, but this is the longest river in North America. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and I only had 3 weeks to do that. And so basically, we didn't, unfortunately, have the ability to float the entire river over the course of 3 weeks. It would have taken a little bit longer than that to get that taken care of. So we had to drive, and we had to find waypoints along the way. And because this was sponsored in part by the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, we wanted to hit up a lot of cultural sites as well as wildlife. And so I'm just going to flip through these really quickly. We started at Lemhi Pass, which is the symbolic source water for the Missouri River. When Lewis and Clark were traveling through, they went to Lemhi Pass and they found this spring, which was the source where it went down to Three Forks and everything like that. Well, turns out this was before the advent of GPS. They were off by a few hundred yards or so. I don't know the exact number. It was a different fork that is the actual furthest source water, but this one is the symbolic source water. So we started at Lemhi Pass way out at the border of Montana and Idaho, kind of south on that border. And it's a gorgeous area, way up high in the mountains. It was blooming with a lot of different wildflowers while we were out there. And it looks a little bit different than the Mighty Mo or the Big Muddy that we're used to out here. It's literally a trickle that you can, if you look back, you can stand 1 foot on either end of the Missouri River as it comes out of this little rock in the ground. And Lewis and Clark actually make note of that in their writings, talking about standing astride the Missouri River. And so it's gorgeous up there, and I wanted to get some different vantage points of what the river looks like and really kind of do it as much justice as I possibly could on such short notice. And this gentleman right here was retired from, I believe, the National Park Service, and he decided to take us, to fly all the way out to where we were at and to take us over Gates of the Mountains, the kind of right after Three Forks where everything comes together and it starts to get really big and look a little bit more like the river that we're used to seeing. And so this is what the Missouri River looks like way out towards the beginning. And it's historically, it wouldn't have looked exactly like this. Obviously, we didn't really have mountains recently in this region, but historically it would have looked a little bit more similar to this as well before it was channelized and dammed and things like that. And so I wanted to give people a little bit of a before and after, showing them what it looks like and the difference between them. And so this is what it looks like down at the water level. We went through and we took boat rides through this whole area. And I was just really trying to document a lot of the wildlife above and below the water because, you know, this river is very important to a lot of different wildlife in the area. And even the ones that aren't aquatic per se, they still rely on this river to subsist and to live, you know, whether it's hunting fish or even just eating insects off of the water. It's one of those things that a lot of species depend on it. So I took quite a few, what I would call decent wildlife pictures, nothing to write home about. They're pretty generic wildlife images. But it started to kind of compile a little bit of a collection of wildlife as well as some cultural sites along the way. A lot of people have lived near the Missouri River for a very long time, definitely before Europeans came along, that's for sure. And so we wanted to cover a little bit of cultural aspects of the river, as well as some recreational and historical aspects of the river from the Lewis and Clark expedition and things like that. And again, I'm just flitting through these because they're not extremely important to the whole narrative, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. It's also widely used for recreation, and so I wanted to cover a little bit of that as well. And so the trip went very well. We got a lot of great imagery. We got a lot of amazing content that has since gone on National Park's website to talk a little bit about the different sites that people can visit along the way, the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. But I kept on, as we were going along, I kept on thinking, there's got to be something meatier that I can get out of this, something beyond just some generically pretty photography and filmmaking. You know, there's got to be something that I think is a little bit more impactful. And so I decided I was going to dive a little deeper into this, literally and metaphorically. I'm like, okay, so it's the Big Muddy, right? It's this gigantic river. There's a whole lot going on below that surface that you cannot film because it's called the Big Muddy for a reason. You can't see an inch or two through the water because it is not clear, to say the very least. And so I started to pursue photography techniques that included a lot of these underwater denizens or amphibious denizens in this instance. And so this is an unfortunate female American toad who's getting bombarded by male suitors. And so she's, she's being amplexed, which is, you know, a reproductive hug, so to speak, by the males there. And so she's kind of getting dragged under a little bit. And this right here is the best in situ or in the wild image that I was able to get after quite a bit of time trying, because this was right after a rain in the Fontenelle Forest wetlands. So that was about as clear as it could possibly get. And they were that far away from the front of my lens. So it was a little bit of an uphill battle. I still tried though. This was a Schramm aquarium before they remodeled it, and they had the big trout pond and all that out there. They did not tell me that was spring fed and it was extremely cold. Figured that one out the hard way as we were in there photographing and filming the trout. And so I'm like, you know what, this isn't working. Let's jump in the tanks. And these are the old tanks at the Schramm Aquarium before they renovated everything. And so they're a little bit smaller, but there were still some pretty big critters in there, you know, gigantic blue catfish and things like that. And so I got some pretty decent images, but they all kind of looked like they were in aquariums. And so I started to branch out. I'm like, okay, let's keep plugging along at this, see what else we can come up with. So I started to work with Nebraska Game and Parks, the Army Corps of Engineers, and a few other people to start doing in situ conservation projects. So I don't know if you're familiar, but every year they used to, I don't know if they still do it because of COVID and stuff, but they had brood stock, which they would go out and they would collect a whole bunch of pallid sturgeon, which are a critically endangered, or they're a federally endangered species out in the Missouri River. And so they would collect them, tag them, take the biggest adults to basically reproduce at the Gavins Point National Fish Hatchery, and then re-release them. So I got some pictures of that. I got some pictures of things like piping plovers and other things like that that I could find. At least I was kind of shooting in the dark here, just trying to find all these different projects that I could find, you know, aquatic species surveys, things like that out on the riverfront. That actually is downtown Omaha. That's the national parks, the Lewis and Clark Trail headquarters right there too. So this is right off of the Omaha riverfront. And that's Sam Stukel. He's one of the biologists out at Gavins Point National Fish Hatchery, who I became very good friends with along the course of this, and he started to show me a lot of the really cool species that they have there. And it really got me thinking, and I started to come up with some harebrained schemes, but it all kind of came together when I started to do educational programming at Fontenelle Forest. And at this time, not knowing what was in the water for good and for bad reasons, I decided, oh, I'm going to start seine netting through this, you know, this wetland with a whole bunch of middle school and high school kids just to see what comes up. And my wife, who got voluntold a few times, she loved going out there in the nice anaerobic muck and things like that to pick some stuff up. But we did find quite a few really cool things in there. And this right here, we did not find in that floodplain. I did not find a paddlefish there. That would be amazing if that was the case, but no. This one was back at Gavins Point National Fish Hatchery. And I started to think, what if I take these animals out of the water, put them in crystal clear water on a white backdrop? I'm sure many, or if not all of you, are familiar with Joel Sartori. He's a good friend of mine. I work with him a whole bunch. And so it's a similar technique to what he uses, but it's a little bit different in the sense that I backlight it to completely white out the background, no shadows or anything. And I wanted to keep that water line in there as a symbolic gesture showing above and below the water, how it's all kind of interconnected with that water line. And they came out pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. It was impactful in the sense to where you could make eye contact with these species. You could get to know them at a completely like horizontal level. You're not looking down through the water at them. It's very clear, and it also had a lot of great educational components to it. You can talk about, you can talk about how paddlefish are forced filter feeders to where they have gill rakers, just like whale sharks. These are, these are essentially the whale sharks of Nebraska or the Midwest. And so these gigantic fish, they just swim through and they get up all the zooplankton and all that in those gill rakers, and that's how these gigantic fish eat. And so there's a lot of educational components to these images as well. So once I kind of stumbled upon this technique, it definitely snowballed from there, and that's when I really found the, for lack of a better term, branding for the project, the aesthetic line that continued throughout all of them. And so you can even photograph things very tiny, like paddlefish eggs. These little tiny eggs the size of a BB turn into these gigantic 6-foot, river monsters, so to speak, even though they're very passive and gentle. You can also photograph endangered species by going to aquariums and things like that. So this is a pallid sturgeon out at Gavin's Point Fish Hatchery. And so I just kept on going along. I started photographing snakes, all with the water line. I started photographing turtles, a lot of different reptiles, amphibians, things like that. This was actually the very first image that I took in this whole series, and I took that down at the wetlands at Fontenelle Forest in a mobile little 10-gallon tank. But that water line was important for a lot of stuff, but a lot of animals, it would be unethical for me to put them in a water line. These guys start life underwater, but they don't necessarily live there at this stage of their life. And so I started to just get everything that I could think of that was related to the Missouri River Basin, even bald eagles and some of these species that are above the water but still directly are linked to it. Birds dive underwater as well too, such as grebes. And so I was trying to get more and more creative as I could go to really represent this connection to the river with all these species. Even things like northern long-eared bats, which are federally protected now. Like this was one of the last ones that was actually found in Nebraska. After this, I don't think they've really been detected at all because they followed that Missouri River corridor as a migratory species. And since the advent of, I don't know if it's white nose or what the case may be, but they haven't been found since. And so I think this river, it's important to show that it matters to a lot more species than just fish. There's even things like river otters. This was taken with the help of Nebraska Wildlife Rehab. I don't go out and just randomly collect animals that would not be ethical. I try to keep everything above the board and ethical as possible with the supervision of specialists wherever I'm at. So things like baby river otters and things like baby North American beavers. All of these things can be filmed on this white background. None of this is photoshopped out or anything like that. And so you can really just connect with these species and learn a little bit about them and really start to empathize with what's living in the river. And I would like to say that these are pretty images. I'm proud of them. But for every one pretty image that I'm proud of, there's probably 50 to 100 that don't look like this. They look like this. Or, greased lightning is basically what I call mink nowadays. They are not the easiest things to film or photograph. And because it's a pristine white background that I like to photograph on, invariably mink and a lot of these other species, they'll like to poop all over it and just, it's a huge mess. So it is a little bit of a cluster showing you how some of the stuff is made. And I've got a little bit of a behind the scenes video showing you a pelican and just what goes into filming this. So that's Ellie at Nebraska Wildlife Rehab. And she worked with this pelican every day for a long time, and it still wasn't a fan of her. And so usually, like I said, I work with a lot of these specialists, a lot of these people who can watch me and be like, okay, this is safe, the animal isn't stressed, things like that too. Because I never want to be in the position of having to make that judgment call when there's something, I want to get the shot, and if the animal's not happy with it, this pelican was just ornery 24/7, so that was not a unique case of me being there. But yeah, I'm an associate fellow with the International League of Conservation Photographers, which is a group of photographers around the world that really focuses on ethics and making sure that we're not doing things that are detrimental to wildlife just to take pretty pictures. And so to me, from the foundation of this whole project, that was one of the core tenets, is that I'm not going to do things just to get a pretty picture. And there have been species that I haven't photographed because guess what? I was with a biologist and they're like, this animal's too stressed, let's put it back. And I didn't get the shot. And that's, I find it, I would find it horribly ironic if I ended up killing or injuring animals to protect them. So it's one of those things that I feel deeply, that I should respect them along the way. And so all of these images over the past 5-6 years, as Mark was talking about a little bit ago too, I'm like, okay, now that I have, a decent amount of images, what am I going to do with these things? And so the floodplain exhibit was birthed from there. And it started off at Fontenelle Forest, and it's been to a lot of other places since then. It's actually sitting at the Nebraska City Lewis and Clark Center right now, has been for the past few months, because I keep forgetting to go pick it back up from them. But so essentially, this started off as kind of like a fine art gallery. I wanted to make it something that adults could dress up and go out and see if they wanted to. There could be opening events and things like that. But I also wanted to make it accessible to children, because these are fine art images, but there's a lot of educational components that I think kids would find interesting as well. And so I go to a lot of things like Earth Days and such as well. But one of the cool things is I worked with a good friend of mine who's a local environmental educator, and now she's actually the aquatic education specialist for Nebraska Game and Parks, Grace Gard. And so she developed a really cool scavenger hunt for kids to go around. So they have this paper saying, can you find the animal that has this adaptation? How many insects can you find versus arachnids and things like that too? So it's something that adults can kind of go around and look at, but they can also have kids going around and engaging in a different way than adults might be doing. And so, as Mark mentioned, right before the College World Series, they had the Lust Fest thing and all that on the Iowa side of the river. They were gracious enough to let me set up the exhibit inside there for, it was hundreds of people came through that building at least. And a lot of kids and stuff like that, again, for the educational purposes. And then I'm like, okay, well, we can do this even bigger. And believe it or not, that's what was it, $5,000 worth of stickers? I can't remember exactly the price tag on those. It was a lot of stickers. And so my CPA actually called me shortly afterwards and said, is this a mistake? Did you spend $5,000 on stickers as a business expense? And I told him it's not like stickers you stick on your laptop or water bottles or things like that. These are big, giant sidewalk decals, because for the first iteration of this, we plastered 50 of them all along the Omaha riverfront, along the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge, and down onto the Iowa side of the riverfront as well too. And so the city of Omaha, city of Council Bluffs were very helpful and kind and considerate and let me do this. And so it was quite the process of installing these things when there's bikers zooming by you and everything happening at once. But the advantage is I'm not a famous person. I could go out there and I could kind of watch what people were engaging with and how they were receiving all of this. And it was really cool. Parents would go out with their kids. The kids, we placed them to where one was just far enough to where you could see it in the distance. And so it kind of encouraged you to go to the next one and then the next one. And so I would see kids walk up and they would be super interested, read the little facts about it, and then be like, okay, let's go off to the next one. And so they did this for all 50 of them. And that's like half a mile walk one way, I think, if you take the river fronts that we put them on. So that's a long way to go to see a lot of these things. And it was hugely successful. And so this was the first time we did it, but it definitely wasn't the last. I find it extremely ironic and kind of poetic that it did flood out. And so the Council Bluffs side in particular, they all got flooded, which to me, I mean, that's perfect, right? It's almost a little bit of advertising in that regard. But so for future iterations, I started to partner with the National Park Service because they really, really liked what was happening. It was right out in front of their building. And they were saying, okay, so the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, that's a big place with a lot of different organizations and nature centers and things like that along the way. Because COVID hit and we couldn't do an in-person exhibit like we were wanting to do, this is actually serendipitous that we just did the sidewalk decal thing, because now when no one wants to go inside and touch, educational components and things like that during COVID, we can have this exhibit that we ship to places all around the world, and they can put them out there on their own. They can install them. They don't have to worry about people going inside because this is all an outdoor component. And so this exhibit was shipped to over 30 different nature centers all along the Missouri River. And so it reached, I would imagine tens if not hundreds of thousands of people, let alone, probably just during the College World Series with the traffic on that bridge, that was probably tens of thousands of people, I would imagine. And so it's been this hugely impactful thing. I had a 5-year agreement with National Park Service, and that came to a natural end, and it was very impactful, but they also wanted to continue and see where else we could take it. I'm still going to continue with this Missouri River floodplain exhibit because that's my passion project, that's close to home, and that's what I want to spend a lot of time working on. But also, they said, what if we take this and we continue along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail and go to the Columbia River? And so this past, was it March or something like that? I don't know. Sometime this past year, I went out to Oregon and I started to photograph what I could along the Columbia River portion. And we're going to slowly start adding it to this and see if we can do the same blueprint for this traveling exhibit out in the Columbia River. And so obviously things look a little bit different out there. And behind the scenes looks a little bit similar too. These nice big white backgrounds, well lit, big aquariums working with a lot of these big fish hatcheries that have fish elevators and things like that for bigger species now, such as salmon. We have to find the smallest individuals that can fit into a big 55-gallon tank because some of these things are gigantic. But I think the visuals and the imagery are still coming across as well branded and in line with what I'm trying to do. And I think, a lot of these species, people see them all the time, but maybe they don't see them frozen in time with, all of the water lines and the droplets and things like that as well. So I'm trying to continue this all the way through the Columbia River, even with the a little bit less traditionally beautiful animals such as lamprey and all that. But you know what? The tribes actually pulled through, and they are the ones doing the conservation program with this out there. And so they're the ones that brought this fish to me at the last minute because they liked the project and they liked what I was doing with it. And this is a great example of, I got these 2 shots of this of this animal before they were like, it's too stressed, let's pull it out and we'll call it a day. And so luckily I was able to get the shots with these ones. And so I know I went pretty quickly through it. I wanted to leave some time for Q&A and things like that, but I did want to definitely thank National Park Service, Back to the River, and Audubon Society of Omaha. They're the early days folks that, saw some value in the project, and they kind of helped me along the way and helped me get going with all of this. So yeah, I think at this point, they're grabbing the mic over there. I think I rambled pretty quick, didn't I? Yeah, was that a little quicker than you guys usually do for these presentations?
Well, that's fine. We'll do lots of questions.
Awesome. I may or may not have the answer.
Okay, Lina, here you go.
I have a few.
Yeah, go for it.
You just had a picture up there of the skinny whatever that.
The lamprey, yeah.
What are the holes?
Those are a part of their gills.
Oh, okay.
And so that right there, those are the ones that actually suction to rocks and things like that.
Oh, okay.
And so those are the ones, if you ever go to the Pacific Northwest, you'll see them occasionally on the sides of rocks. They can climb up waterfalls and do all this crazy stuff with that suction cup basically for a mouth.
So when you're talking about Fontenelle wetlands and you're out there in the water, I'm thinking snapping turtles. We always see snapping turtles down there.
I may or may not have kicked a couple snapping turtles barefoot. I don't know.
Well, and some we've
Accidentally.
seen some pretty good size ones,
Yeah.
boy.
I mean, I've gotten a little bit older and wiser since then, perhaps, and I wear waders when I can now, just so
Oh,
my
yeah, that'd
feet don't
work.
smell like anaerobic bacteria for the rest of the week. Yeah, so it's one of those things when you're young and adventurous, and you, in retrospect, go, yeah, I probably wasn't the best decision.
Well, and your wife and the kids, I'm like, whoa. Anyway.
Yeah, no, those ones, I knew where the snapping turtles were at. They usually
Okay.
stayed on the streams and stuff.
All right.
This was like the big educational pond that they had out there at the time,
Okay.
too.
And the did you say saddle surgeons?
Pallid
Sturgeon?
sturgeons?
Pallid,
Pallid, yeah.
How long are those?
Oh, they can get pretty darn
It looked
big.
like in the
I mean, I
picture.
don't know the exact numbers, so don't quote me on this, but definitely like in the 5-foot range, I would say. So they're very large sturgeon and very cryptic, ancient-looking species.
Yeah. And you said River's Edge Pavilion. Where's that?
That's the Iowa side of the riverfront, right out in front of Omaha near the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge. So yeah, they've got kind of that whole pavilion area set up where they do concerts and things like that. Yeah, any other questions?
Here we go.
I have a friend who's expert on amphibians and reptiles. He says snapping turtles are generally, if they're underwater, much less aggressive. If that helps you feel
Oh
any
yeah,
better.
my background's in herpetology, believe it or not. So I intentionally go looking for snapping turtles all the time, so
But he emphasized to me that it was generally.
yes.
So is the river clear in the winter? 'Cause I spent a lot of years in the Mississippi, and it became quite clear in the wintertime. So I wondered if that was the case with the Missouri. I don't know.
Not any appreciable
Oh.
clearness that I would see, and by that time it's all covered in frazzle and ice, and it's not something that I would go wading out into anyways. I'm sure the water clarity isn't what it should be the water cleanliness for someone to go out there swimming in it on a regular basis. There's a lot of runoff, there's a lot of adjacent cities along the way. So I just think for a safety perspective and a clarity perspective, it's something that I'd love to get out there with, like an electronic ROV or something like that. I just met some people who do great things in the Great Lakes with those, but that maybe is a little bit out of my price tag at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
How is the health of the ecosystem of the Missouri River? Is it improving at all or getting worse, or what do you think?
I am not a hydrologist. I'm not an ecologist on a grand perspective who can tell you hard numbers, facts, and figures. But I am not overly impressed with the trajectory of the health of the Missouri River. I think people are becoming more and more aware of our impacts on the river, and I never really set out to tell people necessarily, this is what you should do, or this is, I didn't want to preach to people. I just wanted to help people be aware of what's at stake with all of this. I'm not in legislation. I don't, I'm not an impact maker in that regard. I'm more hoping just to educate people about what's out there. And I know there's a lot of, there's still consistent flooding that happens, and a lot of that is how the river is managed. There's a lot of conflict between agriculture and places like the Army Corps of Engineers and all of that. And it's one of those situations that, to me, there's no straightforward answers necessarily. It's tough decisions with how this river is managed, because people's livelihoods and lives are at stake with how it's managed, but you also have entire species that are on the brink as well. So I'm not entirely, I would not say that it's doing splendidly and that it's a great outlook, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that with projects like this and the great work of a bunch of people who are a heck of a lot smarter than me, that there's going to be some compromises that I think we come to eventually. I'm hopeful.
And I do know recently in the state of Missouri, they got millions of dollars to the NRCS, and they're buying back a lot of lowland property. In fact, they're not being able to find willing sellers. They've got a lot of money in their pockets that they're trying to buy out right now. So they're trying to acquire habitat. They were doing that in Nebraska for a number of years, but there hasn't been much acquired lately. But the Corps of Engineers was setting up a lot of the islands and backwaters like Tobacco Island and Blackbird Bend and stuff like that for years. And that's kind of been on hold with all the lawsuits on the Missouri River and the Corps. So, but right now in Missouri, they are buying back some land and returning it back into habitat along the river.
That's excellent news, and I think that's how things are going to change. I know it's been done on different rivers before too. I think you can't fault people for wanting to create livelihoods on the riverfront if there's fertile soil and things like that, and maybe there hasn't been a mega flood in generations for them on that specific site. But I think looking back to the historic hydrology of the river and recognizing that this river floods, like that's the hydrology is, it's a floodplain surrounding this area in many areas. It's something that I think people are hopefully going to be more and more pragmatic and purchase that property and realize that these floodplains are there for a reason, and it's actually beneficial for everyone if certain areas of this river flood on a regular basis.
that easier to buy that land when it's been flooding? People are more willing to sell if it, if they've flooded out how many times?
I don't have the answer for that necessarily. I'd be making a lot more money as a real estate agent, I'm pretty sure. I know there's a lot of politics involved with it. You've got generations of family that own property for agriculture and stuff. So when you have any of that deeply ingrained connection to the land with families and stuff, I'm sure it's not easy.
So I know there's a lot of different studies they do on the Missouri River. Do you try to tag along when parks people take animals out of it for, samples or testing or, and say, hey, can I take photos of those if you gather those specimens?
Yeah, I try to when I can. Obviously biologists are extremely busy people. I'm an extremely busy person. A lot of my work takes me out of the country and things like that. But whenever I can, like a lot of those images you saw with like the fish surveys and stuff, they were doing netting out right in front of the Omaha riverfront and brood stock and things like that. I try to do those whenever possible because I enjoy doing those too, even beyond the scope of this. Biology is my background and I get super excited around fish and amphibians and everything like that. So I'm always open to that and I want to do more of that. It's just a matter of coordinating with everyone and getting permissions. Sometimes, people are a little withdrawn about a lot of this stuff for good reason. Not every attention is good attention sometimes when you're a researcher.
Additional questions?
So you had a steelhead photo up for the Columbia, is that
Yeah.
right? Where did that one, how did you get that? Because there's not that many coming up anymore, right?
That was all from, what was the name of that fish hatchery?
There's,
He was wondering where the steelhead photo for the Columbia River.
it's a kind of a rainbow trout that migrates between the ocean and the,
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact name of the fish hatchery. And
it's not Hood River, it's close though.
no, it's, oh my gosh. It's on the Columbia River. It's literally like all of those were taken, if you look right here.
Is that Bridal Veil Falls that you had behind you in one of them?
No. So it's this fish hatchery right here. So right off to the right-hand side, just out of the view, basically like this is a gigantic conveyor belt that brings all these fish and stuff down. And so way over here, they literally have a fish elevator that goes down into the river so the fish can swim into this basket as they're naturally migrating. And then they just haul it up out of the river and they can kind of take their pick. And usually they would do this for spawning and doing things like that. So I left it to them and I was like, whatever you can get me from different species, go for it. And so it all came from this one fish hatchery. This whole project was done on short notice for the Columbia River portion. And they were extremely accommodating.
Is it Bonneville?
Bonneville, the fish hatchery, yes, that's the one. Sorry, my memory with names is not amazing, so.
Well, I just heard on the news that the American people, or just people, probably not just this country, are very interested in all sorts of things outdoors, going places, and mostly when they do, they're really interested in what they see and what they can get involved with. And I wondered if you noticed this as you work on these projects. Are there people who come up and talk to you and ask you what you're doing? And does this happen, or are you mostly with other professionals that are out doing projects?
I get a lot of positive feedback from people while I'm out there in the field doing stuff. A lot of what I'm doing, if I'm at like Gavin's point, it's behind the scenes to where it's not really in a public interface. But when I'm out, literally at waterfalls, people come up and they're curious about what I'm doing. And I try to take every amount of time that I can. Sometimes I'm in a rush, but to me, that's the whole point of this, is that public interface and educating the public. And coming from an environmental education background, doing hikes with middle school kids and things like that, I kind of thrive on that because it's validating to me that what I'm doing, however significant or insignificant the scale, it is doing something. It's moving the needle, however infinitesimally small it may be moving. And so I try to do that whenever possible. I try to do talks like this whenever possible, just because that's the whole point of this. I'm not going to become a millionaire working on this project, and I have no desire to be a millionaire doing this project. It's more something that I can pluck away at when I have the time, and hopefully it makes a difference in the long run.
Well, speaking of the millionaire thing, apparently the people that are interested in money are finding out that there's an awful lot of money in people going out on vacations, going to places where they can see wildlife and where they can just, have their vacations, kind of learning as well as having a good time. And apparently some people who are very interested in money are finding out that that's a place where that's a category of, business that should be developed more. And
Yeah.
it'd be nice if Nebraska would, get that idea with the rivers that we have, and the Niobrara being a national scenic river. But our people don't seem to have got that notion yet.
I think that there's a lot of great case studies of people converting to ecotourism and realizing that, there's value in this, and even ranch land and stuff like that too. There's the prairie chicken place. What am I thinking of? Calamus. That's a functional cattle ranch, and they've converted a pretty significant amount of their resources and personnel towards ecotourism and people getting immersed in nature. And there's, I think, quite a few case studies of that. And I think, as with anything, technology changes, industries change, and all of that. And I think what once may have been major industry that took up a lot of land, maybe eventually it won't be as applicable in the future. And so people will start changing. And so I travel all over the world, and I do a lot of ecotourism myself. And I think that it's something, as long as it's done with good intent, I think we're just going to see growth in that. Because like you were saying, especially after COVID, people are realizing how valuable being outside and experiencing nature are. And so exhibits like this, getting out into the field and actually seeing things, I mean, if I could capitalize off of getting people out there, that'd be a win-win for me, right? So who knows what the future may hold. They do, yeah. Yep, I filmed out there actually as well. I used to be the videographer for Nebraska Game and Parks, so I went to a lot of fish hatcheries in Nebraska.
Any other questions? Well, let's thank Alex for a great presentation tonight.
Thank you so much, everybody.
If you have additional questions, I'm sure Alex will stick around for a few minutes afterwards. We are going to have some cake out there and some coffee and some water, so stick around, have some cake with us. So thanks again for coming out tonight, and thank you for joining us online, everybody.